Welcome to the Republican Professor. This morning we have a very special guest with us, Sarah Jackson, the woman behind Sarah Jackson Coaching on Instagram. Welcome, Sarah. Thanks for being here.
I'm glad to be here, Lucas.
Well, that's very nice to say. Thank you.
Well, I mostly know you online, so it's nice to have a face-to-face touch point.
Yeah, that's true. We
Yeah.
have known each other online for a long time, I guess over a decade, probably.
Yeah.
We were writing colleagues together many years ago for a nonprofit. I remember one particular meeting we were in. I think it was a Google Hangout or something, and people used to do that.
Yeah.
That I just remember you looked to me like you were going through a lot in that Google Hangout. The face that you would put with your writing was not the same happy face that I saw in the Google Hangout, and that was, I think, the first time I became aware of your story. What you were going through at the time, and I've seen, I think, a pretty accurate, I know I've only seen glimpses here, but just what you share, which I think you're pretty open. Of course, I don't know the whole story, so it could be like I see like 5% of it, but from what I've seen, you have a very compelling story to me of struggle and health and challenges and stuff like that and wellness. And I do think that you are a very wise person. And that's why I wanted to bring you on, because you have the kind of life experience and the life story that it would be very helpful for people. And I'm sure it is helping you people with your business and stuff that you started. So anyway, you have this Instagram account that I follow, Sarah Jackson Coaching. You've gone from like, I mean, I don't know specifics, but I just remember, seems like it was like 1,000 followers or something, or hundreds of followers when I was following it. And then I sneezed and it was like 3,000. And then I blinked again and it was like 7. And then I went for a walk. I came back from the walk. It was like 10,000 followers. I think I think you're like double that now or something, just us talking here. So you're, I'm very happy for you. I'm very happy for that success that you're experiencing. Anyway, I'm going to quit talking. So let's hear from you, Sarah Jackson. I know that weren't you like a star athlete in high school? How would you, where would you start talking about your story?
My story. Yeah, I think I probably would start with my athletic days, because that's really where my health challenges began. I was a hurdler, and a 100-meter hurdler and a 400-meter hurdler in college and high school, a 300-meter hurdler. And I was fast and really enjoyed having a strong, healthy body that served me well and got my college paid for. And I'm originally from Washington State. I came down to Southern California to run track. I wanted to run track at a university that had some theology training and a good program, a good track program, and found myself really at an elite program with a lot of aspiring Olympians. And it was such an intense, rigorous program that my body started breaking down. That was the first piece. Now I think in terms of my nervous system and body being resourced to navigate the stressors and experiences of my life. And I look back and I just think with my studies, and I loved academics and I dove in there. And then my program, which was such intense Olympic level training, though I was never an aspiring Olympian myself, it was too much for my body. And so although I had had this really magical childhood and healthy little bubble that I lived in, that's when the bubble began to grow thinner and thinner and eventually pop. So a number of things happened simultaneously. As the program was wearing my body down, I was living in an apartment that, unbeknownst to me, had a whole lot of mold. And I also had to get on some medication to help my hormones because of what that program was doing. A lot of, I think we're seeing more conversation about this now. A lot of athletic programs are really designed for the male body. And so there was some medication for my hormones that really wreaked havoc. And I just started to feel that myself. And I got slower and started getting sick a lot. And that was the beginning of a very long journey of health challenges. I eventually, in my mid-20s, found myself exposed to Epstein-Barr virus, which is a virus that a lot of people get. 95% of the population has Epstein-Barr in their system, but a very small percentage of the population will have long-term issues with Epstein-Barr. And so after a several year slide into the pit, I found myself in bed for the better part of 6 years.
What was
that is the nutshell.
what was the time frame of that 6 years? What years was that?
Yeah, it was a couple weeks before my 26th birthday. And then I did not start to find healing answers until I was 32, or almost 32.
And you're 33 now? I mean, what years was this?
Yeah. So now I'm 37. So it's been 5 years that I have been healing, and so I can give you the details of that process of finding.
Yeah. So I'm trying to, I think, so during that, the very brief little anecdote I shared about the Google Hangout,
yeah,
that was during that time when you were.
It was.
So you were writing at that time. We were writing colleagues, and you were writing from bed, do you think? Or
from bed. Yeah, from
really?
bed.
Wow. Wow.
Most of it. Yeah, there was a period. So the beginning of the 6-year period, I didn't know that I'd been exposed to Epstein-Barr. Doctors were flummoxed. It took about 6 months before they found Epstein-Barr in my system. And that infection was really active in my body for years. And it wreaked such havoc in my nervous system, really all my systems, digestion and hormones, endocrine system. And there was a point, though, a few years in, where I did start to see some healing progress and was able to spend a couple of days out of bed. And during those couple of days, there were times where maybe I could go on a little hike, or I could hang out with friends. And so that was part of the time. I think there was overlap. We were writing together when I was really in bed every day, and then as I was starting to see a little bit of encouraging progress. But then there was more mold exposure. There was another virus, cytomegalovirus, and so there was a second perfect storm. All of my perfect storms have had in common mold, a virus, and then some sort of trauma, some sort of pretty significant disruptive relational experience. And so I had a second one of those, and found myself really sicker than ever.
Wow.
And yeah, that would have been my 30th, right about my 30th birthday.
That's those particular years are, it's just really sad to me that those years were spent in bed from those ages.
Yeah,
that's a really crucial part of anybody's life. I mean, any part of anybody's life is crucial, I know, but that's to go from being a star athlete. Didn't you win some awards or something when you were in high school? Did you compete at the state
Mm,
level?
yeah, I won state in both of my events in high
You were first
school.
in state?
Hmm.
What state was
Yeah,
that?
Washington State.
That's a that's not like a that's not like Rhode Island or something. I mean, well, maybe it is. I don't know what the population is, but it's a big state. Was it a
Yeah,
public
it was a
school?
competitive. It was public school.
Wow, that's a
Yeah,
big
when I
deal
came
to
out of
win
high
first.
school,
You won first in state.
I did.
You were like the
Yes.
top champion. Wow.
Hmm.
So you were the
Yeah.
fastest person in Washington going over those hurdles
Hmm.
when you were 17 or
Yeah,
8, well,
18.
I guess 18. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, to go from that to, because like I have to slow way down to get over those hurdles, I'm like putting both hands on, making sure I don't pull a muscle. To go from that to you're now just screeching halt.
Yeah.
How long would it take you to write those articles?
A long time. Gosh, and I can't remember specifics, but it was a lot of work. So one of the things that happens when you have that kind of chronic illness, and there are parasites that invade, and there's just it becomes so layered, is you just have really intense brain fog. And so there's limited mental and emotional capacity, and it's really hard to find words.
So in other words,
So
you have depression at the same time as you're having the
yeah.
physical issues, and that's
Mhm.
all compounded. And uh, you sound very knowledgeable about, like, looking back, you feel it seems like you have pretty well describable when you were going through it. Obviously, there must have been a tremendous amount of confusion and or what was that? How would you characterize it? Because obviously, looking back, you feel like you have a handle on what was happening,
Mhm.
but during it, did you feel like you knew what was happening?
No, it was desolate. I saw dozens of doctors, and there's a lot of medical gaslighting. Now as a coach, I've gotten to work with many hundreds of people who've lived very similar journeys. And that is one of the common threads throughout our stories, is the medical gaslighting, where you're given a little pill for anxiety or depression. You're told it's just mental. And there are doctors who don't engage in that kind of gaslighting, but there's not a real commitment to problem solving. And I wonder if the pandemic will change that, now that there are a lot of viral long haulers that are, I think, eliciting more attention. There's more research, but it was a long, dry wilderness of searching for answers. And there just were a constellation of labels that were thrown at me. And even if there was, I got a good, kind doctor, and he had suggested some dysautonomia, a real disorder of the nervous system, and um, some other things, and said, listen, I can't help you. There's literally nothing I can get. There's no recourse, but I think you're going to kick this. That was his role. He said, he was in his 70s. He said, in my life, I've had I've had one patient overcome this, and I think you're going to be the second, but I can't tell you how. And so even in kindness, that was the answer that I met again and again and again. Typically, when you have those sorts of invisible chronic health challenges, there are a lot of supplements, IVs, those sorts of things. But there comes a point for many of us where the body becomes so sensitive that it starts rejecting all of that. So I had some naturopathic doctors who were willing to do some problem solving, and I had a holistic medical doctor who similarly was willing to do some problem solving. And so there were some different protocols that in the short term brought some relief, but then I would always move back to a baseline of illness. And so it really wasn't until the 6-year mark there, I'd had a lot of doctors say, you've got pretty intense nervous system dysfunction. Your vagus nerve isn't working right. Your limbic system is problematic. But again, there were no answers. There was no recourse. And then I had a friend who was a therapist who had had Lyme disease and was about 15 years ahead of me on her journey, say, Sarah, you need to rehabilitate your amygdala. And I said, well, yeah, that seems to be what doctors are saying, that there's something with the amygdala as part of the limbic system. So I need to check this out. Limbic system plays a significant role in regulating autonomic nervous system function. And so I just Googled how to rehabilitate your amygdala. This was at the end of year 6.
How do you spell that? The
amygdala. It's Amy, AMYGDALA.
Okay. Sorry to
It's like
interrupt you.
That's okay. It's like the little captain of your limbic system.
The captain.
The little captain of your limbic system. Your limbic system is sometimes called the emotional brain. It's what facilitates your experience of emotion, but it's also your threat alert system.
Right.
So it's working involuntarily apart from your conscious thought. And in every moment, it's intaking billions of bits of stimuli. And it's sorting them in one of 2 categories, safe or potential threat. And if it perceives that there's activate a cascade effect in the body where there are stress hormones that are generated. Is my internet connection unstable? I just got a sign that it is. Can you still hear me? Oh, I just lost you. And those.
We're back. Okay, sorry. So the amygdala is the captain of the limbic system, and you were going from there.
Yes, when it perceives that there's threat in your environment, it initiates a stress response in the body. The body's flooded with stress hormones, and those stress hormones are what are going to help move you to safety. It activates the fight or flight response. And what I began to learn is that long-term viral infection, mold exposure, along with, of course, our emotional traumas, our relational traumas, and even the chronic stress of my track program, where in my college experience, where there was a demand that my body was not resourced to meet, those can all impair your limbic system's functioning and perpetuate a chronic trauma loop where the body is perpetually perceiving threat and therefore perpetually keeping the body in a stress state. And if the body is not able to move out of that stress state, it's not ever going to heal. The body has to be in regulation in order to be in homeostasis. And homeostasis is where the body can absorb nutrition and cells can repair and the immune system can clear infection and the body can detox. So it helped me understand why everything that I had tried was temporary. I would always return to a baseline of illness because my nervous system's new baseline was one of a survival state instead of a state of regulation. And so I embarked on a journey of rewiring my nervous system, which was a really intensive, grueling process. And as I was able to rewire my nervous system, my body came back into homeostasis. My immune system could come online. It could begin to clear the viral infection, detox from the mold, kill off the parasites. And it's been a 5-year process. And I've seen incredible progress. I've gotten so much of my life back, but there still is some room for more healing.
So it was like year 6 that you started putting the pieces together. It sounds like year 6, it was someone mentioned the nervous system. You probably already aware of it, but you're starting to realize there's something, you want to get to this baseline of health instead of sickness. Mm-hmm. And you've just been racked with challenges for so long that it's almost like you had to just start over or something, like with your nervous system. The trauma, the track program, the long-term exposure, all that, you know, I can't even imagine going to all those doctors. I cannot even imagine. I cannot even imagine the frustration. I mean, it had to get to the point where you go to the doctor and you just expect that there's nothing because you've had such dismal experience, right? So how it must, I'm amazed that you were even going to doctors after a while. Like, just how do you, so
Yeah, there comes
when,
a point where you do want to give up.
yeah, I mean, I think I would have given up after like doctor 3 or something, but, um, you were obviously very persistent and I, when you mentioned fight or flight, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Um, but maybe before we do, maybe we should say what trauma is,
Yeah.
because I, full disclosure, everyone, I am a, I guess I would say, am I a client of yours? I don't know, but
Yeah. You're a
am I?
member.
Yeah, I have a membership in her program, and her program is, well, why don't you tell us what your program is, your current one,
Yeah, I have a
your
monthly
website.
membership. hmm It's a monthly membership called Restore. So I did a limbic system retraining program. It was a rigorous system that guided me through daily focus rewiring practices. There were a lot of gaps in that system. It didn't treat me as a whole person. And the nervous system is so relational. We're created in the image of God. I wanted a program that really honored the image of God in me, that treated me like more than matter to be rearranged.
Mhm.
And so I created a membership that has an extensive video library
Do you mind
with.
if I show it? Do you mind if I share my screen? Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Keep going. Keep talking.
It's a blend of practices and education. And yeah, so there's a forum, and then the video library is where there are different categories to help you. Yeah, here we go. So you'll see if you look at this second row here where it says sympathetic activation, freeze
Mhm.
and shut down, head to toe. Those are all full of resources to help you when you're in the different survival states, which I can talk about. So sympathetic activation is fight or flight. If you notice you're in a fight or flight state, if you were to go to this folder, any of these videos would help you signal safety to your nervous system. Because if your nervous system perceives safety,
Mhm.
it's going to start moving out of that survival state. And if you notice you're in a freeze state or you're in a state of shutdown or collapse, there are different exercises. Some of them are cognitive, where you engage your power of imagination and reason. But a lot of them are somatic, where you're engaging movement and you're using your nervous system's language of sensation to signal safety to it. That's really our central focus, or one of our central focuses when we notice we're in some sort of survival state, is we want to signal safety to the nervous system.
Right.
And because that's when there's trauma or chronic stress that registers as trauma in the body, your brain's neuroception, which is its ability to accurately perceive threat, becomes compromised. So it has trouble accurately perceiving threat. It perceives threat where there is no threat. A lot of people with chronic health challenges or even just chronic stress and trauma will start to have chemical sensitivities.
Mhm.
Or food sensitivities. The brain is attaching threat or danger to this innocuous stimuli. And so we really want to help teach the body healthy neuroception. We want to help it understand hey, right now we're safe. Right now we don't need to be in a survival state, and we can use sensation and movement and breaking up tension patterns to help the body understand that. So trauma is
Yeah.
I think is a helpful starting point when we're wanting to understand this care and attunement for the nervous system, whether you have health challenges or not. Maybe you have anxiety, maybe you have depression or perpetual, even shame. Is not just a function of the soul, it's a function of the nervous system. Your limbic system is continually assessing what dignity looks like culturally. Yeah, and there's even in the trauma education, there are some videos to help you begin to explore shame and to help train your limbic system in news stories about your inherent value as an image bearer. So wherever you are on the spectrum, understanding trauma is foundational. Trauma is less about what happened to you, and it's more about how your body or your nervous system experienced what happened to you.
Okay, that's huge. That's huge what you just said. So I'm just going to ask you, can you say that one more time?
Yeah. Trauma is less about what happened to you and more about how your nervous system experienced what happened to you. So trauma occurs when the nervous system is feeling like it's stuck, helpless, or lacking control. And your nervous system, your limbic system in particular, is not just concerned with your physical and emotional safety. It's also concerned with your reputation, your sense of dignity, your sense of belonging, your communal connections. So if it feels like any of those things are compromised and it doesn't have the resources to rectify, to protect you, to protect your reputation, to protect your safety, that's when traumatization can happen. And oh, I should have had my slinky down here. I'm used to podcasts being only auditory and not having the option of the visual.
Well, I can pause it if you want to go get it.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay.
Okay.
And we're back. Got a slinky?
Okay.
Got
Yeah,
something?
I got my little slinky.
Okay.
So I think it will actually help if I start with this ladder. This is the autonomic ladder or the polyvagal ladder. It's based on, it's based on polyvagal theory by Stephen Porges. And I just think it's the best map we have to understand how our nervous systems interface with our external experiences and our internal experiences, our thoughts and our emotions. So this is going to help, I think, flesh out this idea of traumatization. So this should be your nervous system's baseline. This is called ventral vagal presence.
I want to just say this is going out on Apple Podcasts. And so those who cannot hear, who can only hear, let me just describe what she's holding up. She's holding up a picture of a ladder. And there's 3 people on the ladder. I think they're supposed to be the same person, but it's 3 different places one could be on the ladder. The top of the ladder is called ventral vagal. And the caption says, I feel safe, confident, and connected. And the person appears to be happy. It's a stick person and they're holding their hands up. So I can't see their face. I'm assuming that means happy. Then in the middle, in the middle.
Well, you know what? Can I interject?
Sure. Yeah.
Here?
Yeah.
So at the top of the ladder, we have this little stick figure with their hands up because they're feeling confident and resourced to navigate the stressors of their day. And that's one of the characteristics of being in ventral vagal presence or regulation. We call it ventral vagal presence because it's the front branch of the vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve is the main component of your parasympathetic nervous system. That's your rest and digest system, but it's the front branch that moves you into this state of ventral vagal presence at the top of the ladder. And in this state, you're going to feel more connected to your people. You're going to feel connected to your body, your emotions, and come what may, you're going to feel resourced to navigate it. And this should be your body's baseline, the top of the ladder here. Not that you're going to stay here always, but this should ideally be where your nervous system returns when stress has passed, when threat has passed, because this is where homeostasis is, where we're in homeostasis at the top of the ladder.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
That's rest and digest. Is that the same
Yeah,
thing?
rest and
Okay.
digest. Yeah,
Gotcha.
this is where healing can happen. This is where the hormones can regulate and digestion, your gut can heal and allergies can resolve themselves and the immune system can clear infection. Did I say that already?
It's worth saying many times.
It's worth saying many times.
Sympathetic is in the middle, and that's fight or flight. Now, let me just add some of my connection here that I
Yeah.
found very helpful from you. Your coaching on the nervous system has been particularly helpful. There's been some other things too, but I think I'll just focus on the nervous system for this episode. Just because I don't want to cram too much in here for people, but if we can, I mean, I'll add more. But the whole idea of realizing I was in fight or flight for many years on the college campuses, and a lot of people are wondering what in the world does this have to do with my experience, like on the college campuses? Well, I was in the military, and when I went to therapy as a professor, I went to a PhD psychologist for a while I was an adjunct professor on the college campuses. He spent quite a bit of time just basically getting me to see how traumatic my experience is. And I think I'm not sure if I would say I was in denial about it, but I think I was just so used to it
Yeah.
that it was just normal for me.
It was your new baseline.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was in fight or flight, but then I started realizing that as I got older, I was less capable of being in that state for prolonged periods of time. And when I got a glimpse of not being in that state, I preferred not being in the state because I was happier. And so I had to reconnect with some earlier memories of when I wasn't in the state all the time. But so people who have had a really hard time the last couple of years, or whether it's jobs, the economy, relationships, loss, other things, dealing with unpleasant circumstances and it might be your living situation, it might be the neighborhood you grew up in, or the neighborhood you live in. Could be there's all sorts of challenges, and your nervous system you could be going into like fight or flight a lot, or we haven't done the shutdown yet or the freeze yet, but I was in fight or flight for a while, and I was kind of oscillating. So anyway, you gave me the kind of language to understand what I was experiencing. That was not like a clinical psychologist. It wasn't like a psychotherapist approach. It was like, what's happening in your body. And I've noticed that the way you describe it, like you describe it almost like talking, like 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 you use the language of tell a story. It's like it's like there's two people in your body, the survival brain. And so I'm sorry, I'm a philosophy guy, and so like sometimes I notice those kind of things where I'm like, I have to ask you, do you really believe that there's like a survival brain that like has a story? And like, is there a story that's being told? But the way you describe it is very useful, I would say. Sorry, this is coming out jumbled, but I started adopting that useful. I don't know. Would you say it's a useful fiction, or how would you describe it?
Well, I don't know that I would call it a fiction. I think certainly our map of the nervous system is always going to be shifting as we gain more information about the nervous system, and there will be things we need to revise. But I think that
when you say the survival brain, and you say like the story thing, like there's a story being kind of told, like I'm in fight or flight, or my dignity is threatened. It's like I think it's the first time I ever thought about kind of stories traveling through my body. Like you know what I mean? Does that make sense to you? Like I had a hard time with that at first. Like I didn't know how to process that. Like people have called me too literal. Like they say I'm too literal. And then I ask them, what do they mean by literal? And then that kind of like double, you're off to the races at that point.
And your definitions.
Yeah.
Our definitions are important.
Yeah. Well, but how did you come to see the survival brain like that, and the stories traveling through your body? How did you come to see that at first? Because it does seem to help. Like I started realizing, so much of your work is getting people to notice what's happening, like what the attunement stuff. And I noticed that your techniques do work. They actually do work. Like, if I can describe a couple of them really quick, just briefly, you have one where you just look around the room.
The eye orienting.
Orienting, yeah. And just slowing down, and you have some where you're releasing. I mean, the whole deal is where you're releasing stored energy. And I had a significant pain in my feet for years, to where it was very painful. It could have been very painful for me to run, and running was one of the funnest things I used to do as a kid. I loved running, and in the military I loved running. But I had to take boxing tape, like for the boxing hands, like those boxing things. I had to wrap that around my ankle and my foot. I have high arches, just to go to work, just to go teach my classes for years. And it turned out, I think it was trauma, stored energy there. And it was only life circumstances where I wasn't in the classroom, I wasn't on the stressful college campuses, which for me were politically very stressful places. I mean, I experienced it as trauma because of the story I told about in my mind about, which I think is a true story, but about where the direction of the country was headed and culture, and my students aren't learning, and there's a lot of grade inflation, and people don't take it seriously. There's all sorts of social media stuff that gets in the way of it. People have lower attention spans. And I just took that to be more stressful actually than what I did in the military. And I did, some pretty stressful things in the military. I had a harder time on college campuses, and it got stored in my feet. And then, like, when my schedule got lighter, I actually had irritable bowel syndrome for the first time in my life. I didn't even know what it was. Like, it just hit me all of a sudden, like as an older man, like, older, younger man. And it threw me off so bad. Like I thought I was dying. Like I had cancer or something. Turned out it was just irritable bowel syndrome, and lots of people had it. And then I realized this is actually now affecting my digestive system. I don't know how it didn't affect my digestive system before, but now all of a sudden. So I just noticed these weird things happening. And so I bring that brief description of my experience to your obviously we were friends and connected online, not really in person as much, but online I was following you and your story. When I started seeing you put the pieces together, and then you were putting together like an entrepreneurial thing, I was very interested in that. I was really excited that you were uh, doing something with all of this knowledge and wisdom and experience that you had. And then when I saw your product and how good it was, like, I was like, this is great. This is what I needed. Like, I wasn't in a place to benefit from it prior to that, but I was like, yeah, this is a key for me right now. Like, I need to figure out this nervous system thing and be really careful about slipping into fight or flight and how I can get out of that. And that's tied to stored energy and stored trauma. I think a lot of people are going to benefit from this, and they probably already are.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It is one of the happiest plot twists, because I didn't think I was going to heal. I mean, there came a point where I just thought, this is my life, and I don't know that I have a lifetime of this in me. And so to get to hear from people who are experiencing the benefit, they're feeling shifts in there. Are you feeling a shift in your feet then, it sounds like?
Yeah, I don't wear the boxing stuff in there. And I haven't for a while. That started shifting a while ago, but it had to do with crazy schedules, and the extreme unpredictability of it. And just, I couldn't keep up with it, basically. I tried, but
yeah, it's amazing the kinds of pain and infection and hormonal issues and autoimmunity that can show up from this chronic stress and trauma. And so to answer your question though about the survival brain and the thinking brain interfacing, part of the body's intelligence is it has to communicate with us. If the body perceives that there's a threat and you need to run, it is going to, from the bottom up, we call it. So your body is going to communicate upward toward your brain. It's going to communicate, we have got to run now or else. We've got to do something about this now or else. It might not look like we've got to run now. It might look like, we've got to lose the weight now or else. This is something that I hear often. Or we've got to have the conversation with the spouse now or else. If it feels dysregulating to have the space, that fight or flight impels somebody toward action. And that's just the body's way of communicating. It communicates with sensation, but it's going to generate thoughts. What's happening in the body is going to impact what the thinking brain perceives. And then
that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
The thinking brain, there's reciprocity in turn, can influence the firing of the limbic system. We can use our reason and our imagination to signal safety to the limbic system. It's really whatever we imagine, the brain experiences as if it's real, right? That's why you can think about some catastrophe that hasn't happened yet and go into fight or flight. Even though the catastrophe isn't real, the body is generating, mobilizing energy so you can run or fight to address it. So we can use our imagination to really generate a sense of safety and calm that feels real and true to the body in the same way that we can use sensation. So there is this reciprocal relationship between the body and the brain. Bottom up processing and then top down processing is when the brain is able to impact what's happening in the body.
Can we go back to that ladder again?
Yes.
I think we were in the middle of describing that.
Yeah, so I'll describe now that I know
okay.
this is going out without the visual in some places. So if you're in a state of ventral vagal presence at the top of the ladder or regulation, and your brain perceives that there's some sort of threat to your safety, your sense of dignity, your reputation, your belonging, your connection, It's going to move you down the ladder. So you can just imagine you're moving down toward the middle of the ladder to sympathetic activation or fight or flight. It's your sympathetic system, your nervous system, that moves you into this state. And it's a mobilizing state, which means in this state, your body is going to generate a whole lot of survival energy. And that survival energy is going to enable you to run or fight. So if somebody has a nervous system calibrated defaults to fight, they're going to want to be more argumentative. Whereas if somebody has a nervous system that defaults to flight, they're going to be more avoidant. And so in this state, you're going to feel anxious, vulnerable, maybe even in danger. You're going to feel bigger emotions like anger. If the story that feels true in the top of the ladder is, I've got this, I've got what it takes. The story that feels true in fight or flight, as I mentioned earlier, is I need to do something about this now or else. And
I like how you said the story that feels true.
yeah, right. Right. So much of this healing of the nervous system, of repatterning it, is bringing awareness to when those stories show up and what they actually mean, that they're not necessarily indicators of your reality in terms of your lived experience. Actually, I want to say that differently. They're not indicators of what's happening outside of you necessarily. They're an indicator of what your nervous system perceives is happening.
That's huge right there. That's huge. Huge, huge, huge.
Huge, 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 because we know that that perception that we call neuroception becomes compromised when there's chronic stress, when there's unresolved trauma. So we're getting closer to our trauma definition. We're laying the groundwork here.
We're just taking our time, aren't we? But
Yeah.
It's such a wonderful journey, though. I mean, we're checking out all the flowers in this field.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, I think, is really foundational to being able to work with your nervous system, is understanding the different states and how they relate to traumatization. So in a fight or flight state, your heart rate's getting higher, your blood's pumping to your extremities so that you can run, you can fight, but things can get too amped up. And your brilliant brain goes, whoa, if things get, and this is happening involuntarily, apart from your conscious thought, your brain goes, if things get any more intense, if the heart rate gets any higher, we're going to combust. And so it pulls an emergency brake. And you remember, it's the front branch of your vagus nerve that moves you into regulation at the top of the ladder, but it's actually the back branch of your vagus nerve, according to polyvagal theory, that pulls this emergency brake. And that's going to send you to the bottom of the ladder, which we see here in red. It says dorsal vagal shutdown. Dorsal meaning back branch of the vagus nerve, moves you into shutdown. And in shutdown, your nervous system is literally starting to shut down. So the blood that was in your extremities is no longer moving into your extremities. You're losing blood flow to the brain. And so we've got our little running man at the middle of the ladder at fight or flight. At the bottom of the ladder in dorsal vagal shutdown, we've got a man who's moving into the fetal position. That is going to be the position that feels safest for the body in a state of dorsal vagal shutdown. And the story that's going to feel truest in dorsal vagal shutdown is, I can't, I don't have what it takes. And the experience will be one of emotional numbness, disconnect from our bodies, from our sensations. There can be some disassociating that happens. There can be overwhelm. There's shame that we feel at the bottom of the ladder sometimes.
Yeah, that's huge. Well, especially if you're a strong man and you feel like you should be able to handle this, and then you're not, and it's involuntary, there could be a lot of shame. Well, I don't know how it is for women. It's probably the same.
I think also, if you notice, if somebody does or says something that triggers shame in you, you're probably going to notice the slumping, the wanting to disappear, the wanting to get smaller, and that's characteristic of that dorsal vagal shutdown. And then our final state is the blended state. It's not pictured on the ladder, but if you can just imagine, we've got our yellow fight or flight and our red dorsal vagal. If you can imagine an orange box that says freeze. Freeze is equal parts sympathetic activation or fight or flight with dorsal vagal shutdown. So the body wants to move, but it can't, because dorsal vagal shutdown at the bottom of the ladder here with the fetal position is a state of immobilization. And similarly, freeze is a state of immobilization.
Yeah, freeze sucks. I hate freeze. I've been in it.
Well,
I
and the
hate
body, oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, I mean, actually, all these states below the top kind of suck. And I can see that now. I can see that now. But like freeze really is like the worst, I think. And then I think the second worst is the dorsal vagal, where you don't have any energy and you're kind of like slumped. I've been there. And then the fight or flight. Here's the thing about the fight or flight, I will say. A lot of people in politics are in fight or flight, and a lot of political stuff like ads, people call it being an activist. Just think of the term activist.
Mhm.
It's interesting. I think this is very unhealthy, like the way we're doing it. And I'm able to see that a little bit more clearly now from my experience of health. Is I think we're making people unhealthy. And I think kids see this and they're turned off from being involved with just trying to understand the world, because it's too exhausting. But yeah, there's, I think, a lot of trying to get people to do something involves the motivation of trying to get them in fight or flight. And that's, I guess it's appropriate if there is a war, like, if World War II or something,
Mhm.
like, probably there was a little bit too, well, World War II historians would know exactly where this is, but probably a lot of that stuff could have been avoided if there was a little bit more attunement to the reality. But people were comfortable, I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure the story exactly, but then when you treat everything like it's a war and
Right.
it's constant fight or flight, then what if it's not? Like, what if you're missing some opportunities for connection and wholeness? And then if you're in that state, that nervous system state, you miss those opportunities, and missed opportunities are very sad. It's very sad. I think with higher education, the best learning is done in the top of the ladder, sin, rest, and digest. I think that that's true. But think of how much learning is done from a panic position. Like, you think of law school and attorney study, you think of like preparing for the big case, or you think of the big exam or the big midterm or the big presentation, and staying up all night. People stay up all night. The only way you can do that is if you're doing fight or flight, and can't do that for very long. Like, you can't.
Right.
The older you get, like I remember I used to pull all-nighters. I hated them, but I could do it. And I was kind of proud I could do it. And see, this is what I'm getting at, is I kind of liked fight or flight
Yeah, it's
for
addicting.
a while.
Well, it feels good to get that jolt of adrenaline. And you had said earlier that as you're restoring this baseline of ventral vagal presence or regulation to your nervous system, you're able to be happy. But I think the emphasis on productivity, especially, post-industrial revolution, this is the measuring rod that we use to assess success in a person's life, is what have they achieved and produced. And it's hard to produce in our constant grind. You start to get tired. And so then your body needs to kick it up a notch. And the only way that we can achieve these ideals of production, whatever the realm is, politics, education, is for the nervous system to amp up into that state of fight or flight. Because your sympathetic nervous system is designed to activate you, to get you up out of bed and get you ready for school. But you don't need to be in a fight or flight state to do that. We end up moving into a fight or flight state when we become so depleted that we don't have what it takes to keep showing up and putting in the work. And so then the body compensates with these extra jolts of adrenaline, too much sympathetic energy that moves the body into fight or flight.
Yeah, it became apparent to me that at the point of my schooling in which I think I fully figured this out was when I was writing the dissertation, because I knew I could not write it in fight or flight. I did quite a bit up until then, like even my doctoral exams. I was teaching 6 classes at 3 schools in Los Angeles and taking 2 comprehensive exams, 6 hours each, for my PhD. I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I did. But then after that, I was like, okay, that's it. This huge project of writing, I couldn't do. I could not do it because I couldn't think. Like, it's like my brain was, it's not that your brain was fried. It's not an exhaustion in that sense. It's that it was brain fog. It was like, I couldn't, it was like I was just got back from a war or something, you know. But there's so many things that you've mentioned that I always like, oh, I'm trying to figure out what I want to say. You said that the nervous system is designed. Do you mean that it really was designed, or how do you mean that? I'm getting to how you see the world.
Your worldview.
Yeah.
Yes, I do believe it really was designed by God to be relational. That part of being in the image of God is that he's wired power into us to literally rearrange the matter in our brains, to repattern the nervous system, but that we want to do this in a way that is relational, compassionate, kind, treating the body not as an object to serve us, but really as this intelligent gift that is wired to work collaboratively with us. And I have clients from all different walks of life. A lot are followers of Jesus, as I am. Some are atheists or agnostic, Buddhist. It really is quite a wide spectrum. And I always want people to feel safe in our sessions. And so I'm intentional to tailor the time in ways that feel safe for them. But I think the one thing that I can't get away from is whatever your worldview, this work doesn't work unless you know that you matter and your body matters.
Wow. That's huge.
It's huge. It's huge. And it's just, to me, another compelling signpost to this picture of dignity we have in the Genesis account, that we are created in the image of God, and that matters in every area of life.
So it's hard to separate that completely from this work. So you blend it in. I notice you don't shy away from saying that. And I kind of wonder, from an entrepreneurial perspective, I'm interested, like, you're obviously very good at making people feel safe who might not quite understand or maybe disagree with that part. So that's quite an that on a professional level, that's quite an accomplishment there. But you're also incredibly authentic. And I think it's not a fake authenticity. It's real authenticity. When I say authentic, I really mean authentic. you know me, I like the definitions of terms. I'm like using that word for a reason. So it's in that sense, it's not a gimmick. It's not like, oh, I'm authentic, take my program or something like that. It comes out very naturally where you're like, this seems to be true. And you have, like the way you just said it, you said, this doesn't work unless, how'd you say it? You believe
That
that you
you
matter and your
matter and
body
your
matters.
body matters. Hmm.
You have to believe that.
Yeah. And I think it's this, I mean, it's much like, I mean, it's a spiritual formation process. I think anytime we come to repattern the nervous system, it is an invitation to a deeper formational process. And one of the principles of spiritual formation is you lead with your body long before you've internalized the truth about who you are, who God intended you to be, the value that He's placed in you. You practice that story long before you believe it. And one belief, see, as a philosopher, you'll of course be thinking there are different parts of us that know and believe. And so when I talk about belief, certainly there's like this intellectual understanding of, yeah, I matter, but an embodied, visceral, emotional understanding, that's the formational piece that is foundational to this healing process. And so that intellectual, imaginative picture of, yeah, I'm creating the image of God, guides us as then we begin to practice and live that out in ways that the heart and body can begin to understand.
Yeah, that makes sense. Practice, you're saying practice comes before belief sometimes?
Well, it comes before that emotional, embodied.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of people say they believe God God loves them. For
Mm-hmm.
example, God loves me, let's say. But then if you ask them, do you feel that? They might not have the same response. They might say, it doesn't feel like it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure. I think what you mean is it's a philosophical question, I guess, whether you can believe it without feeling it.
Well,
Maybe you can,
you
but
might give it like
it's,
conscious theology versus a subconscious theology.
yeah, that's right. That's a good way to put it. I like that. Subconscious theology. And the subconscious matters a lot, like for your health. And you don't seem to like, do you view your work as hacking that, like kind of like a computer hacker, or do you view it like, sounds kind of nerdy to say it that way, like you're some kind of computer geek and you're like, okay, this is how you hack this nervous system or the limbic system to get it to do what you want it to do.
Well,
You don't
I
come off that way, I don't think, but
I try to steer clear from language like that because one of the characteristics of being in this state of fight or flight in the middle of the ladder is a fix it mentality. Like, I've got to fix what I'm feeling. I've got to fix my nervous system. I've got to fix myself. I've got to fix this issue. It's very utilitarian and it's objectifying. And so the body does not like to be treated like an object. So I like to use language and imagery that is more relational. So it probably, I mean, there are so many different ways of illustrating it, but it would be more akin to a wise, compassionate parent coming alongside a small child. And your limbic system really is like a 2 or 3-year-old coming alongside that small child and guiding them into a new way of being, a new way of attuning to the nervous system, caring for the nervous system.
That might sound a little odd to talk about your body that way, but it does seem to work. Like what your approach seems to work, like this compassionate model. It might sound a little odd that you're compassionate with yourself. Some people might have a little bit of resistance to that. Like it just seems odd. But if what you're saying is true, that we're created and designed by God, we're loved by God, our bodies matter, we matter, it makes sense to
Yeah.
approach it that way. How long did it take you for you to figure that out? I mean, not, like it was one day you figured it out, but like,
Well, I think we might think of layers of healing, but I even am a little resistant to that imagery of layers, because it's not like we have these compartments of ourselves. We're not an egg carton, and like mind's not separate from body and body's not separate from soul in that way. It's sort of the cliche of the tapestry, but I'll just use the term layer for now. There's the soul healing, where you come to understand that this matters because I matter. There's the psychological healing, where the emotional wounds that have developed over time, you're processing, you're tending to. And then there's this more superficial layer of rewiring. And I don't mean superficial in any sort of negative way, but where you're rewiring the nervous system. And I also want to back up and say, as I connect this to my story and my learning process, when we're wanting to heal trauma, actually, should I just really briefly finish the trauma definition? Trauma is when that survival energy that mobilizes you gets locked in your system. It accumulates in the body over time. So that's where trauma can arise from chronic stressful working conditions. It can arise from a little boy who cuts his knee and needs stitches, and his brain's not feeling resourced, his limbic system's not feeling resourced to help him navigate that situation. So there's this accumulated survival energy in the body over a lifetime. And so when we heal trauma, we're wanting to help the body release that energy. Because as long as that energy is stuck in our system, and it can get stuck in the system for decades, as long as that accumulated survival energy is stuck in the system, that's when we get stuck lower on the ladder. That's when the baseline becomes freeze, functional freeze, or fight or flight, or even, dorsal vagal shutdown could be the baseline. And so as you're able to release the stored energy, you're able to move up the ladder. And the only way your body is going to release is if it really understands, I am safe, I am loved. So whenever we're doing this trauma work, we want to think about these relational containers. There's a wonderful resource, Peter Levine, who compares this to a cast. A cast on a broken arm doesn't actually heal the arm, but it holds the arm in place so the arm can do what arms do, which is heal. And so we have these relationships with each other, with our own bodies, with God, that are stabilizing, that are nourishing, that bring healing to the soul and allow the body to do what the body is wired to do, which is move toward healing.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so you might even think of concentric circles, and I don't know what order certainly the outer circle is your container of your relationship with God, and then you have your relationship with yourself and your relationship with other people. Your relationship to your own body is, of course, a big part of your relationship to yourself. When there's chronic stress, chronic trauma, or unresolved trauma, it's very natural to develop an antagonistic relationship to the body. Not that we're consciously thinking antagonistic thoughts, though certainly we may do that, but we're just slave driver, right? And go, 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 go.
Yeah.
And so my 6 years in bed, those were the years where I really learned to practice lament, which I think should be one of the central and I don't mean should in a pressury way that can feel activating to the nervous system, those should. I think there is a beautiful
That's helpful.
formational invitation to lament. Lament is where we develop that container of intimacy with God. And so I had to learn, as I was a star athlete and I had excelled in college, even with my health stuff, on my team, and I had excelled academically, and I garnered a lot of accolades and respect and rapport with people. And that really was stripped away when I was in bed. And all I had to offer was I could breathe and I could blink. And sometimes I could stand up long enough to scramble eggs. And there was so much shame I had to face.
I cannot imagine.
In that place. There was so much shame, and I had to really learn what I would have told you, Lucas. I would have told you, of course you're beloved when all you can do is lie there and breathe and blink. Of course you're still imbued with this eternal value and significance. But that was my conscious theology. And the moment it was like the fig leaves, if we go back to the Edenic imagery, stripped away, the fig leaves of achievement and performance and even service in the kingdom of heaven. There was so much shame. And so I had to experience, it's interesting to me, the body, I think, and the heart, the emotional core, learn very similarly. They learn through experience. They need to be shown more than they need to be told. And so I had to experience the love of God that delighted in me in my weakness.
How did you experience that?
Well, lament was the process of opening myself up. So we can't ever
lament, like lamentations, right? Like,
yeah, like we see in the Psalm.
Can you describe what lament is?
So we'd see this throughout the whole of Scripture. Lament, Scripture really prioritizes this picture of grieving with God in prayer. Lament is a prayer of pain that really has a number of movements. We might think about this in terms of breaths. I had a colleague who talked about the 2 breaths of grief, Fred Sanders at Biola. So we have this first breath, which is anguish, which is the articulation of pain. This is where you expose your raw wounds to the holy healer. This is where you air your rage and your spiritual doubt and disorientation in the throne room of God, which can
sounds very vulnerable. Yeah,
it can feel very off limits. Especially culturally, there's such an emphasis on triumphalism and moving from spiritual victory to spiritual victory. And will we please God when we air that sort of anguish, anger toward him, questions about him? But that complaint is the way that we expose our wounds to the healer. If we're not exposing our wounds to the healer, our emotional and spiritual wounds, they just fester in the darkness. And so that was the first piece for me, was everything that's going on, the shame, the true spiritual disorientation. Who are you, God? And what do I mean when I say you're good? And I had to air all of that. And as I was just intentional to engage in this honest prayer, I can't describe it except to say that he just met me with experiences of his love. I would wake up in the morning, and so I get choked up even just thinking about it. And I had this feeling that I had never had before and haven't had it since. I've been healing, like the Spirit of God was hovering over me. I would wake up and I would think about creation and that picture of the Spirit of God hovering over the waters. And I would have this sense that he was singing. Gosh, it does. It was such a special time. He was singing over me, which of course we see that scripture, that picture. Is that in Lamentations, that picture of him singing over us?
You just sounded British.
British, is that in Lamentations?
I was about to say, as you started crying, I was about to say, track your releases, celebrate your releases. That's an inside thing. She'll say in the product that she has, her website, her subscription community, that she'll say, track your releases, so you're not you're paying attention to, like, when you sigh, there's all these releases that happen, tears,
Uh-huh.
movement in the belly, even gas, if you can believe that. That's funny. It's kind of funny. And there's no shame. And when you say it, and you just, in fact, you're saying you should pay attention to those releases because you're releasing stored trauma.
Yeah.
And so when people become awkward, when people have like tears,
Mhm.
it's a different way of looking at tears. When people have tears, you can just
Yeah.
be present and notice, and you can notice in yourself. And you're very kind to yourself, I've noticed.
Well, that's what those early years in bed of really experiencing the love of God meeting me in my emotional and spiritual nakedness did for me. Was I started to internalize, and I'm sure I'll spend my whole life internalizing this story. I am created in his image. I am beloved by him. And
You know, that's a huge thing you just said. You've said so many huge things, but that's another huge thing. I'm tracking your huge things.
my huge thing.
The huge thing you just said was you haven't arrived.
No.
You look as if you have it all together. For those who are listening, she's got this immaculate house or whatever behind her. You look like you just have it all together physically, and your hair is, everything's perfect. And what you're saying is, you're saying this is an entire my journey of your entire life.
Yeah.
So in other words, you haven't arrived. It's an ongoing journey,
Mhm.
ongoing thing. So, and that comes out like in how you approach it. Like, I think online, I'm always amazed when I'm watching your videos. I can't do very many at one time. I can usually do just one, and then I just focus on that for the day. Sometimes I can't get to it for another couple of days. But I've just noticed how comfortable you are with what you're doing in these videos. Like, how did you get to the point? I don't even know if I can ask this question or whatever, but like, how did you get to the point where, are you just naturally good at that? But because some of this stuff seems so vulnerable to show other people your process, like what works. Some of these techniques, because I mean, it's got to be like you're there just by yourself in the, talking to the camera. Does it ever seem, it doesn't seem like you're judging yourself at all. Like you're just, and that's why makes it work. Because then I'm not judging myself. If you're not conscientious, then I'm not. And, because some of the stuff you're doing involves physical movement and tracking your releases, for example, tracking like if you sigh or if you have tears. It's vulnerable, you
Mhm.
know. Did you have to work to get to a place like that, or did it
Yeah.
just happen?
I was very blessed that I had a psychologist I could start meeting with over the phone when I was in bed. And I think it was our first session. He very quickly focused on how critical I was of myself. And he invited me to start getting curious about my thoughts, my feelings. That was the starting point. It was later that I started getting curious about physical sensations that were uncomfortable. We call these symptoms. And so it has been a long process. It's been 12 years of almost 12 years now of practicing curiosity about what's happening inside of me. It's like I'm sitting in the grandstands and I'm watching my thoughts and my feelings and my physical sensations tumble about. And sometimes I even think it's like I'm a social scientist and I'm gathering information, because that sort of removes the emotional charge of judgmentalism that we're all wired to judge the ways that we feel and even our thought patterns. It's so hard to shift thought patterns when we're just coming at them from a place of judgmentalism, because that judgmentalism heightens the fight or flight response, which rearranges the blood in your brain. It's just, there's not true formation that happens when we're not getting curious. So it's just been a lot of years of practicing that curiosity within this container of I am beloved and created in the image of God. And I think there was a real turning point for me, and I see this in my clients, because traumatization is the experience of being helpless, lacking control, being stuck. That's when traumatization occurs. When someone is traumatized and there's that survival energy locked into the system, or it's accumulating over time, it's normal to perpetually feel stuck and helpless and like we're lacking control in these different ways, and maybe to not even be aware of it, but to just be a perfectionist. And the perfectionism is the coping mechanism to compensate for that felt vulnerability. I'm lacking control right now. And so one of the things that's brought enormous freedom for me is to notice the power I do have that God's wired into me, that I can signal safety to my nervous system. And when it perceives safety, it is going to release that energy. And I can track what that feels like when I'm doing this work and I spontaneously sigh, or my tummy gurgles, or I burp. Now I know, oh, I'm moving into rest and digest. Even the passing of the gas, because the nervous system governs all of our systems, we're going to see shifts in all of our systems as we're working with the nervous system. And so I can celebrate that. And it feels like if you've been backed into a corner and now a door is opened. And so I think that joy and freedom alongside the curiosity have been a long time coming.
Well, there's a command in scripture, as you well know, to love your neighbor as yourself. And a lot of people, well, shoot, there's so much in scripture you could just, we could talk about the Sabbath for hours, right? That's an amazing commandment, the Sabbath. It still blows my mind, the Sabbath, but what the implications of that is. But love your neighbor as yourself. Presumably there's a high calling on love of our neighbor, and that gets a lot of attention, I guess, but the love of yourself doesn't really seem to get as much attention, at least in my experience, how to do that well and what that looks like if you do that well. The self-care, I think that's a common word you hear, self-care.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's got to be rooted in that. Don't you think? The concern that God has, that you have concern for yourself.
Yeah, well, you're created in the image of God too, not just your neighbor.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, one of the characteristics of being in a stress state is very black and white, all or nothing thinking, either or thinking. And I think there's something about this prospect of turning toward yourself in love that feels threatening to Christians. I think Christians in particular, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just humans in general. I do see it across religions, across faith communities. But I think it feels like, oh man, if I turn toward myself in love, honoring myself as an image bearer, am I going to end up a selfish person? And I don't want to be a selfish person, and that's not pleasing to God. It's this it's very all or nothing. So
right.
That's part of healing, is noticing when you're operating from those very black and white either or paradigms. Not to say that there aren't moral absolutes, not to say that,
right?
But
yeah,
bringing awareness to when that is a consequence of being in a stress state, of feeling threatened.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you have a partner in crime that oftentimes brings joy to me. I have laughed unexpectedly because you have this little dog, and the little dog is a white dog. I'm going to describe the dog. It looks like maybe a larger Maltese. I don't know what kind of dog it is.
Multi-poo.
Oh, is it? Okay. I should say she is named Lily, right?
Yes.
And the funny thing is that you'll be doing some kind of stored energy release kind of technique that you're using. It might involve putting your body in a certain way, and Lily will just be looking at you. And it's not like she does the whole time, but she'll just look at you, and you might not even notice she's looking at you, which is kind of funny, but she'll just be looking at you. Or sometimes she comes and tries to like get involved, like, she's like wondering what are you okay? And she comes and checks on you, and you have to reassure her, and it's hilarious. It's got to be great having a dog. I'm jealous of you in a good way because I don't have one. I had one. I had them as a kid, and I haven't had a chance to have one as an adult, and that's been kind of a sad thing for me. But it's got to be great to have a dog.
It is.
Was that a huge part of your journey of health?
Yeah, about 2 years into my process, I started to see massive strides a year into daily focused rewiring practices. Really, I'm spending, in that first year, hours every day, just focusing on rewiring. And then the second year was able to focus more on processing grief. It's very hard to process your emotion in real time when you are stuck in a survival state. So processing grief, helping my body unload that burden of grief. And then year 3, I've had the trauma in my life has really been unrelenting. I sort of found myself mired in another kind of trauma as I started to heal. And it was in some ways, debilitating as my body was feeling overwhelmed. So we don't have the resources to navigate this. And Lily was a special grace to me in that time. And, having a pet is wonderful when you're learning to work with your body. A pet is so present and grounded, and you're getting down on the floor with them, and they're helping you come into your body as you're feeling the softness of their fur, and they're licking you. And so,
and they never judge you. You're always you're totally accepted in their eyes. I mean, if you treat them well, which obviously you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's the best.
Are you a thinker or a feeler on the Myers-Briggs? Do you know?
That's interesting. I'm an INFJ.
INFJ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tested as an INTJ in college, but I think in college, I'm so sensitive. My feelings are so big. I survived before I got sick by disconnecting, and I like intellectual acrobatics. I like it.
You do.
I do. So
when you present your material, it's always very careful. You cite your sources verbally. You're like, well, this guy said this, and even in this interview, you kind of look up. You'll look up, and you're like
thinking.
Yep.
Upper right is where I go.
You're very careful. You're very careful on how you present stuff, I've noticed. So I had to ask. That's the reason I had to ask, because I was like, is she a J or is she? I know you're a J, but are you an F?
I am an F.
She, okay.
But
are you an Enneagram? Do you follow that?
I follow it. The Enneagram is not as intuitive to me as the Myers-Briggs, but okay. Yeah.
I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just using, I heard somebody say Enneagram, so someone's going to find that interesting.
You know your Enneagram?
I'm 6.
You're a 6. And see, I don't really know enough about them. I functioned as a 3 until I got sick, and then saw that I also have a lot of 4 in me. Okay. So I think I would probably be classified as a 4 wing 3. My understanding is the 4 is that, sensitive, big feeling, creative, and the 3 is the achiever. And they have very different ways of relating to emotion. So it's much easier to be a 3 when you've got the big feelings.
I might have interrupted you when you were talking about the Myers-Briggs. You tested as INFJ. I'm sorry if I did.
I'm an INFJ. I tested as an INTJ in college, but I think that's just because I was I was surviving by disconnecting from that sensitive, big feeling. Although go ahead.
Did you just call me a goat head?
I think that, and I don't understand the particulars of the Myers-Briggs. It feels, the Myers-Briggs just feels more intuitive. Like I can meet someone and sort of sense what they might be. But I think the F is, it's also about decision making, isn't it? Are you more values driven? I think Fs are more values driven. I don't know.
When you
Somebody
look back
else-
at, when you look back at your life and you look at where you're at now professionally, how different is it from how you thought you would be, where you thought you would be, like say when you were in college?
Yeah, it's very, very different. I was working on a PhD and was teaching, I was at like you, I was adjuncting at the university, and I thought I was just going to teach full time in the university forever and ever. And I loved teaching at the university level. So this was,
You're a very good teacher.
thank you. Thank you for that, Lucas. That's so kind. So yeah, this was not even, at no point have I sat down and mapped this entrepreneurial journey. It's just, the very beginning.
Did you see yourself as an entrepreneur ever, or is it that, because it seems to come naturally to you?
Yeah, I think it is natural. As a kid, I loved to start little businesses. You know, really wanted American Girl doll, which was this very expensive doll. It was like $110 when I was a kid. And so, you know, I would create these business opportunities so that I could earn money for that doll. And I did love it. It was natural, but it's interesting the boxes we place ourselves in. I think at some point I just put myself in a box, and there was no thought that I might be an entrepreneur, but I like it. It's invigorating. I like being my own boss.
You like being your own boss.
I do.
Do you have control over your own schedule to some extent?
Yeah.
You like that?
I do like it. I don't love not being able to see colleagues, you know, over lunch.
Yeah.
It's kind of lonely in that way, being an entrepreneur.
Well, if you're kind to yourself, I can see why you'd like being your own boss. Because your boss is great. Your boss is just a great person to me. That's cool. I think it's, if you can understand how to create your own business, it takes a lot of, from my perspective, it takes a lot of guts to start something new that doesn't exist, that you create. It takes a lot of belief in yourself.
Yeah.
Do you experience that way, or?
I don't know if I have a lot of belief in myself. I've tried to assess how much of this is belief versus just that crazy part of me that would sprint full speed at hurdles, you know?
Gotcha. The sprinter.
There's gotta be a piece of belief, but maybe there's also just a piece that's willing to take risks. I don't know. It does feel vulnerable every time I launch something. And it's really only been a little over a year that I've been investing in this business and growing it. Every time I launch something, I do feel sort of overcome by the vulnerability of it.
Yeah. Do you still sprint? Do you ever get it inkling to just go sprint?
I don't get an inkling to sprint. I think that's one of the ways that I could still heal. My body still remembers sprinting and just feels like curling up and taking a nap. It just,
okay. Been there, done that.
Yeah, I've been there, done that.
Totally.
I run though. I've really enjoyed returning to running, and I think maybe that'll be the next phase of healing for me, is just letting my body get to a point where that anaerobic activity doesn't sound so dreadful.
I have in my notes here, you spend a lot of time at the beach. It seems like that's on purpose. You do a lot of videos of the beach. Seems like it's at sunset. Unless you're going to the East Coast and that's the sunrise, but it seems like you're in California. I'm in California. What has the beach done for you?
Oh, no one's ever asked me that before. Well, it helps me come into my body. It helps me attune to my body. I think the sensory experience of the beach, there's the wind and that salty air and the seagulls.
And you share that experience with others, and you'll have commentary, you'll have a psalm, you'll have a prayer. Sometimes it's very minimal words that you'll have, and you know what those words are. You'll say inhale, exhale, and sometimes it's just something like a prayer, a very brief or something. And it seems like that's a part of the healing thing for you.
Yeah, it is. Whenever we're healing the nervous system, we don't just want to notice the triggers, because when we notice the triggers, we want to draw boundaries around them. We want to help the nervous system find safety if it's a neutral trigger. If it's a trigger that's indicating threat, then that's where we want to create the space and draw the boundaries. But we also want to bring awareness to what Deb Dana has coined glimmers. And so if a trigger signals threat to the nervous system, a glimmer is going to be something that signals joy, peace, or freedom, or strength, or any of those things that feel hard to feel when we're stuck in survival mode, when we're in a stress state. And so a glimmer can be something really small and simple, like for me, the feeling of my hot cup of tea in the morning. That hot ceramic against my hands is very soothing and comforting, snuggling with Lily, but the beach is just rife with glimmers. Beauty is one of my most favorite glimmers, the way that beauty nourishes both the nervous system and the soul. And I post a lot on my Instagram and Facebook. I want to give my community education, but I also want to share my glimmers with them, to give them little breaks in their Instagram scrolling from stressful content, just be able to come in their bodies a little bit.
Yeah, that's very important for you. I can tell you're very intentional. Sometimes you'll do this game of, I forget what it's called. Would you rather?
Yeah.
I was going to say either or, but that didn't make sense. But would you rather? Would you rather is like a little game you play where would you rather, sometimes I don't relate to it because I don't relate to like having tea and a Jane Austen novel. But
Right.
I can kind of substitute my own, like, would you rather go hunting in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado with your dad, with a 300 Winchester Magnum on your shoulder as a 14-year-old, or would you rather go fishing in Wyoming, or so, I don't know, but I just substitute my own. But
Yeah, there are more women in my audience than men, so I think it does default to some of those. Although not to say that men wouldn't love a good Jane Austen novel. Good literature is good literature. But yeah, it's fun.
I haven't tried it. I have not tried.
Oh.
She's got to be good. I mean, she's famous. I mean, it was mainly men in the publishing world for so many years. She survived because
she's good.
She's very good. Obviously, I just haven't had a chance to read it.
She's funny. You might like her, actually. I mean, I don't know your literature, but she's funny. Yeah.
Are there any pictures in the novel? Because otherwise, I typically just I need pictures. I'm kidding. That was a dumb joke. The number of people that look at me.
Degrees for me to take seriously on that.
The look I get from some people when I say that, I've thrown most of my Bibles away because they didn't have any pictures. I have my precious moments though, but
I had one of those. Yeah,
I have one my grandparents gave me in the 80s. Sarah, I just totally, I've enjoyed our conversation so much that I lost track of time.
Oh, that's okay. We're good.
That never happens to me, and I loved the non-rush feeling of this. I love listening to you. I think you're so wise, and I guess it's just because I've known you for a while and I've seen your struggles, and I've related to it in my own story. Like, wow, this is a very human thing. Like I used to think of what you went through as very sad for you. But then as you started coming out of it, I was like, oh, wow, this is triumphant. There's something else going on here. This is really cool. This has got appeal across the board for people. Like, and there's a lot of people apparently that have the same very similar ways of relating to your story, and how you how God helped you through that and helped you heal. It's really cool to see. It's really awesome. The glimmers that you share, it's amazing how we all find the same nervous system response to like puppies.
Yeah.
Or like little duck, nobody's triggered by puppies, no one's triggered by the beach. Like, you don't have to worry about this sunset and someone going, oh no, that brings up, I'd rather look at concrete. I'd rather look at skyscrapers. No, I mean, there's a universal appeal in your story. And I love seeing you create a business out of it. I have high respect for anybody who starts their own business, because it is no joke what's required to start your own business. And I love that you also couch it in spiritual formation, which I think is very important. And you don't shy away from that. You're not embarrassed about that at all.
Well,
So,
I so want people to find physical healing, to understand the role of the nervous system in chronic health conditions and how healing it can change things, and chronic mental health conditions. But more than that, one of the things I say, your body matters because you matter. And I want people to have that physical relief, but I yearn for them to find the deep, soulful healing that I have experienced in the person of Jesus. And so I don't want to leave that part of my story out, because that's the best part. That's the best part. And
a lot of times people lead with that, and there's not really a connection, I don't think. I mean, some people, but I think you lead with this way we're designed to respond to our situation, and then it just gets locked in the body, and you gotta release that stuff. There's ways to do it. The spiritual formation stuff comes out as you're doing that.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really neat thing. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, well, I think I might have started to interrupt you. It's hard to know. Yeah, I love that the spirit, anytime we rewire, there are these invitations to deeper formation, to really learning to understand our belovedness, which really means just opening ourselves to the Spirit of God who wants to teach us that. But there's a thread flapping in the wind. I'm thinking for anyone listening who's saying, she gave us the first breath of grief and lament, but not the second breath. I want to make sure I speak that.
You sound like a thinker right now, just FYI. So that's like a total thinker.
Yeah, I do have a lot of thinker.
There was a half of a sentence I left off about 47 minutes ago. Hold on. Let me give you the other half of that sentence.
Well, you know what it is? Did you know I studied philosophy?
I love that. Yeah. Yeah.
You knew that. Yeah. So
I did. Yeah.
There is a precision that I do appreciate, but also the teacher in me, like that shepherd.
I came to speak at one of your philosophy classes, I think. Maybe.
Oh yeah.
I think that's where I first met you, actually, in person.
I think that you were speaking, I think you might have been speaking to undergrad, but I came to meet you. I can't remember.
Okay. I think it was Scott Ray's class. It was on the definition of marriage. I don't know if you were in that class or not, but that's where I first met you.
Class. Maybe it was Scott Ray.
Okay. Well, anyway.
Well, anyways, so for those of you, because I think lament is such a central, important practice for both rewiring the brain and for soul formation. So this first breath of complaint, this is where we not only lay our wounds before God, but our need. And then the second breath is trust. And trust is where we remember God's goodness to us in our story. We reorient to the evidence of his goodness throughout our story. And of course, in Christian culture, we often like to just jump straight to the trust, with our platitudes, but God is good and God's going to see you through this, and those things are true. But then there's this emotional, spiritual congestion where it's like we're continuing to hold up our fig leaves to cover up the anger and cover up the doubt. And so letting yourself really expose your wounds and trust, I think a helpful way of thinking about trust, I think it can sometimes elicit for some people a sense of I need to strive to conjure this thing that I don't have. But trust is really about rest. And so it's about learning to rest in a goodness that holds you as you are processing your pain with Jesus. And that is so important. I don't want to leave that.
Oh, no, I'm so glad you came back to that. That is really good. Especially when you said people lead with trust sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's Bible verses that say trust in the Lord and all that stuff. And it's like, well, how do you force yourself to, you feel like that can lead to shame too if you're not able to do that. And the lament, you're saying the complaint comes first, then does trust come naturally, or does it take some effort?
I think it's both. I think the beauty of when we lay our complaint, and I don't mean a self-indulgent whining though, because I think some Christians say we don't want to encourage self-indulgent whining. Sometimes our complaint sounds like self-indulgent whining, and we still say, listen, this is what's in my heart right now, God. So I'm going to give it to you because you're the only one who can change me. And I want to open myself to your healing power.
That's very vulnerable.
It's very, very vulnerable.
That's very vulnerable.
And what happens when we expose the contents of our heart, however self-indulgent they may sound, or however, aggressive or rageful or whatever they are before him, that's when we give him a chance to show us that he's trustworthy. When we expose ourselves in vulnerability with anyone, we are giving them an opportunity to cultivate trust. It's the only way trust is built. And so skipping to trust really can be so counterproductive because we skip over this really pivotal piece of allowing God to show us how trustworthy he is. He's going to draw it toward us in love, and where we need to be instructed and guided, he's going to do that with gentleness and love. And where we need to be validated and held, he's going to do that. And so
that's really huge right there.
It's
you just
huge.
said.
And it doesn't mean that we don't practice trust. Trust is a spiritual discipline. Trust can look like sitting down and remembering the ways that God has been faithful to me throughout my story. It's a way of it's refamiliarizing myself with my story so I can rest in the present goodness of God now. He's been present in the past. You know what it is? It's, I think, a good picture of this practice of trust is in Exodus, when the Israelites cross the Red Sea, they get to the other side and Miriam leads them in song. And the first 2/3 of the song, they're looking back at the good things God has done. And the last third or so, they're looking forward to the good things he will do. And it's that looking back and that allows them, it stabilizes their hope. Their hope rests on the looking back, and that stabilizes their present.
Mm-hmm.
There can be that.
Yeah.
I mean, those
sometimes you have to do that on purpose too. Like he says, okay, like in Joshua 4, make the stones a memorial for what God has done for you. And that implies to me that sometimes there's things you can do. That's why I like archiving. I was telling you before we were recording that one of my PhD research tools was archival research methods. What I like about that is it's on purpose. We are creating a record. We don't necessarily know the significance of these little things, like a receipt, for example, or a diary. Those are very important to historians trying to make sense of the past. But Joshua 4 is they use stones like an archivist, so that these would be symbolic of what God has done, looking back.
Yeah. Yeah. So it really is opening to giving him a chance to show you his trustworthiness, and then engaging our imaginations in ways that are restful and stabilizing, and by reorienting us to the goodness of God in our lives when it's hard to see it and feel it and sense it.
So you have an Instagram account where you're at Sarah Jackson Coaching,
Mhm.
and I'll link that in the description. Is there anything else you'd like me to link? Would you like me to link your website?
Oh, if anyone's interested in Restore's
Or-
opening again in July. It opens just 4 times a year. They could always find it at my website, sarahjacksoncoaching.com.
Okay. And I'll link that. Is there a way for people? Are you inviting? Well, if someone wants to ask you a question,
Mhm.
is there a way that they can contact you? Or would you say Instagram, or would you say email, or would you say not at this time? Or
Yeah, I'm not able to answer coaching related, healing related questions because I just get too many. So that's where the membership is a nice option, because there's a section in the forum where you can drop questions and I can do Q&A videos. But on Instagram, sometimes I'll do Q&As. And also people often have questions that if they go to my Instagram or my YouTube, they'll see those questions are answered in some of the posts, the videos, the highlights. So
okay. It's been a true joy to have the now famous Sarah Jackson Coaching on the podcast to talk about the nervous system and holistic health. And this has a lot to do with, a lot of the stuff that people are experiencing. There's lots of stress with the economy, with, just normal life even. And there's lots of cool things that you can do to release that stored energy. And also, it's nice to know what trauma is.
yeah.
That's a really insightful thing. That your definition of trauma is so good. I think it's the best I've ever seen. Definition of trauma. Stored energy. Can you define it again one more time?
Yeah, it's the accumulation of survival energy in the body over a lifetime. And so that survival energy, normally in a healthy situation, an ideal situation, that energy is important. It's supposed to help you in a stressful state. But when that stressful event has passed, your nervous system would discharge the energy. And as it's discharging the energy, it's moving back up the ladder, because a healthy nervous system is going to move up and down the ladder.
Oh, okay.
It's not going to be at the top forever. We need to move up and down the ladder. We live in a broken world with stressful stuff, but it's just not going to get stuck lower on the ladder. And
so if you're in a car accident, for example, it'd be really weird if you were in rest and digest, like throughout the whole car accident.
Right.
And you walk away and you're like, that was just a really relaxing time of that car accident.
Right. Your body it's going to generate survival energy to help you get out. Or if there's too much energy in your it might go into shutdown. Shutdown is an analgesic. Shutdown makes it so you're not going to feel as much. And so in a painful situation, that might also be where your body ends up.
So you don't have to go to Vietnam to have trauma.
You don't.
You can just have regular, that was a key insight that you shared. I can't remember where, but you share it over and over again. So if you follow her, Sarah Jackson Coaching at Instagram, at Sarah Jackson Coaching on Instagram, you'll see that you pepper that in, like ordinary things. For different people experience things differently. We're all built differently. We have different Myers-Briggs, different Enneagram. And so one person might experience like a car accident, for example, very differently than somebody else. Somebody else might have a really hard time getting on the highway for a long time after a car accident. And then the other person is just like, well, that happens. And then, someone else experiences whatever it is, right? So it's not just Vietnam
Well,
or nuclear war.
It's not mental weakness either that results in traumatization. It really is how your involuntary system or your system that's working involuntarily experiences it. And yeah, it can be things like even stress in utero and what your mom's going through. I mean, it really can start in the womb.
I just remembered you didn't do the slinky yet.
Oh, I didn't do the slinky. I was gonna, yes, we've wandered many directions and covered so much territory, the slinky got left behind. So for those who are watching, and if you're not watching, you can just imagine I have this little rainbow colored slinky, like the ones you'd get at a carnival. And it's kind of doing some wonky things right now. I'm trying to straighten it out. But when you get out of bed, your body is going to generate energy to enable you to get out of bed and make your scrambled eggs and brew your coffee or whatever your morning routine looks like. And so if you're listening, you can just imagine I'm just moving the slinky in small doses. It's kind of hard to describe. I'm walking. It's kind of hard to describe what's happening here with the slinky. But
it's collapsed. It's collapsed. You're holding it vertically. It's collapsed. And what you're doing is, what she's doing is she's holding the top a few rungs of it, and she's raising it like maybe a half inch or 2 inches, maybe.
Yes. Oh, that was a much better description. And so I'm just lifting it here and there. Now, in a fight or flight state, your body's generating all that survival energy. And so now I've got the slinky and I'm lifting it maybe 2 feet in the air. There's all this.
And then she's letting it collapse, and then she's relifted it. Yeah. So
it's going up and down, and you may even be able to hear it. There's all this energy zinging through. And ideally, when the stressor has passed, your body is going to discharge that energy. And so now that my slinky is coming closer back to the baseline here, you're better at describing the slinky, Lucas. How would you describe this?
You're going back to you're raising it just maybe a couple inches and letting it collapse.
Yeah. So now we're back at our baseline because we discharged all that energy.
Yeah.
But in trauma, what happens is the energy is zinging through. So I'm back to lifting it up and down 2 or 3 feet or 1 or 2 feet in the air. And so when the brain perceives we're helpless, we're stuck, we're lacking control, that's when energy gets locked in the system. And now I've slammed the slinky shut.
Yeah. And then that can come out in all sorts of ways, like irritable bowel syndrome, pain in your feet like I had. Different people experience. What's that?
Autoimmunity.
Yeah. And so your whole deal is figuring out how to release that in natural ways. There's little things you can do, techniques. There's also mindset issues. There's also beliefs about yourself. And you've somehow figured this out over a long time. And it's a journey that you're on too. So
yeah,
cool.
There's always invitation to
I'm really glad to know you. I'm honored to know you. I have a lot of respect for what you've gone through, and just a lot of respect for you. And you're one of the wisest people I know on self-care. And I really appreciate you coming on the podcast to share your wisdom with us.
Well, I'm glad to know you, Lucas, and it was a delight to be able to sit and talk with you face to face today.
Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome.